Hello, everybody. So, this will be an episode on climate change and the climate change issue in regards to American politics. So, I'm going to be reading off some notes that I have here uh, throughout the video. So, I want to start with basically. Basically, this video is going to be about the common arguments and retorts, and then also at the end, my personal opinion on the issue. So, I wanted to go over like some common tropes that you hear and like common arguments that you hear and go through the retorts to them. So, the first argument in regards to the like the environmentalist or the climate activist position is the whole 97% of scientists agree that climate change is real. And you hear that a lot and it's peddled around a lot. Now, the retort to that, if you're against climate change activism, is to say that there's no consensus on any singular model. So, in other words, climate scientists can't predict the future with perfect accuracy. So, the counter retort to that is the answer is that all scientists, 97% at least, agree that carbon emissions contribute to the global warming greenhouse effect and thus climate change. The only argument, the only disagreement among scientists, climate scientists, is how much and how disastrous the outcome will be. So I think that the truth on this issue is not is it's okay, guys. It's established fact and demonstrated by science since the 1800s, actually, that the greenhouse effect is real and that by putting CO2 into the atmosphere, you will warm the planet. That's like this video is basically like that is taking that as fact because I've done enough research on it to know that it's very very established. So the greenhouse effect is real. And when you put carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, you are hurting the livability of the planet for humans. You're making the planet less livable for humans by doing that. And I think that that's true. And yet, I'm still not for most climate change measures that are proposed in America. So I'll go farther into the. Now I'll move into kind of the anti climate change argument. Okay? So these are some of the reasons that guys, yeah, most anti-climate change activists, they just say that it's not real or that climate science is fake. That's bullshit and that's a stupid take to have. Is that climate scientists are fake. No, they're not. The science is real, the greenhouse effect is very established, the harm to the planet's climate ecology is real, established, demonstrated. The ice caps are melting, and human contribution is the cause of it in the past, since the Industrial Revolution. So I'm going to move into the anti-climate change arguments, the smart ones, the ones that make sense. Saying that because it's cold outside or because, or, trying to say that the climate science is fake is just dumb. Now, here's an argument that isn't so dumb. Proposed energy regulations, like Democrat legislative proposals, cause a lot of harm to low income people financially for little improvement in planet Earth's overall situation in the long term. For a theoretical example, you're raising gas prices 30% to reduce climate change by less than 1%. The harm to the economy hurts tax revenue, which harms our ability to react to climate change. We need a strong, booming economy in order to invest in future technologies. The retort to that is to say The harm of increased gas prices is a necessary consequence of pricing gasoline's externalities. So, in regards to the gas tax, Europe has higher gas prices than the US, averaging $7 a gallon, and it has for the past few decades. They consequently have a society much less dependent on gas, and commuting by car for an hour actually costs what it should. Meanwhile, Americans do not pay at the pump for the environmental damage their gasoline cars cause. Taxing gas might hurt in the short term, but it leads to a less gas dependent society in the long term. So you can see the divide, really the difference in outlook, short term versus long term. So raising the gas tax to make gasoline $7, $8, $9 an hour in order to encourage electric cars and public transportation and better city planning, that's something that takes decades to kick in. In the short term, all you're doing is hurting people, especially poor people and people who have to commute. So, in general, Democrats are going to be more in favor of big government plans that work towards some long-term common good. So short-term harm for long-term common good, that's something that Democrats are going to be into and Republicans are typically going to oppose. So I want to move into why and the philosophical reasoning behind that, because this is what I really this is my main problem with climate change activism, is that and this is just a question that I'll pose. Is it unjust for the government to harm people in the present in order to help theoretical future people with theoretical challenges? Government is meant to protect the rights of its citizens, not curate society to be future oriented. And for the retort to that, I feel like there is none, because it's a philosophical disagreement on the purpose of government. Should the government be able to hurt its constituents in order to help unborn constituents? Are the rights of the unborn future sufferers of climate change more important, legally speaking, than the rights of the living? And I think it's really funny because this is going on at the same time as the abortion argument. And Democrats are saying that the unborn don't matter, but at the same time, they want the climate change for the sake of the unborn. They want gas to be expensive, they want this, they want that, all for the sake of the unborn. So it's kind of funny because it's like, but you're saying that these people don't have rights, and that if a woman doesn't want to, she can just kill it. So why can't we just say, well, we don't care about the unborn. We don't care about future people that don't exist yet. We care about right now, and I don't want to pay $8 for gasoline because then I can't feed my kids. And I don't think the government has anything to say to that. I don't think that the government can say that the rights of the unborn, the rights of future people that aren't alive yet, is a just reason to hurt people in the present. So basically I think that a democratic government is by its own nature going to be short-term oriented and help the citizens, help the voters that are alive and voting right now. That's just how democratic governments are going to work, and I think that the only way you can have a government that can really justify hurting everybody currently alive in order to help the unborn is if you have an authoritarian government. Because if it's responsive to the voters, people just aren't going to do that. They'll vote maybe to help their kids. But even then, I wouldn't say typically no. Typically, people vote in their self-interest. So if you want to have a democracy, you're going to have a situation where it's very hard to justify extreme climate change measures because people just don't care enough about the unborn. Their futures are their problem. Their lives are their problem. And how I also feel, for me, for me personally on the issue, I think that I think that there isn't a need long term to be tied to fossil fuels the way that we are. And I think that there's a lot of reasons, not just future people that aren't born yet, but also just in general, like strategically speaking, reasons to not be on fossil fuels or dependent on them. So I think it's wise and fine. And if I was a lawmaker, I would advocate for the government investing in the phasing out of fossil fuels in favor of renewable and nuclear. Because putting CO2 into the atmosphere is harmful and unnecessary. That's my personal opinion on the issue. But I don't think that you can say that. I don't think that you can argue solely based on benefiting the people of the future. Because then, I mean, you know, if you want to orient society towards benefiting people 50, 60, 70 years from now, it's going to look very, very different. Like government in general is going to look very different. It's just not the way a democracy can work well, in my opinion. Now, I do think the main thing is that the rest of the world has to be on board with whatever is done. So if China and India don't do it, it's not going to get done. So what I think the only real way to save the planet is to make renewables cheaper and more efficient so that the countries don't have a choice. So the government should certainly invest in that. The government should invest in all kinds of research and technology because if your country has the cutting edge technology, that is a very important strategic advantage for your country. Its safety and its security. So having the United States produce the best and cheapest solar panels and wind and all that stuff and nuclear facilities is great, and the government should invest in that. But you can't say that it's just because of the unborn people of the future who are going to be suffering decades from now. Because it's kind of like, well, that's their problem. And I think that that's how a lot of people feel about it, because they are struggling. So they need cheap gas in the short term. And, they don't eat next week if gas prices don't go down. So they're coming at it from a completely different perspective. And a government that's responsive to the voting constituency is going to have a really hard time going, especially in America, because we've already built our cities to be so car dependent. It's awful, but it's kind of like the cities are already built, so unless you rebuild them, people are going to have to drive around. It sucks, but it is what it is. The other thing that can be done is limiting, everything hurts poor people in the short term. If you limit international trade and limit the global supply chain and deglobalize, then you don't have the shipping containers, which to my knowledge are the main contributors to climate change, are cargo ships in international waters. So it's like there's a lot of climate change liberals who will like, they'll want everyone driving an electric car and everyone using solar power, but they don't care about all the stuff that we import from the rest of the world. They don't want America to become isolationist. And I'm thinking, so we're still going to have the port of Long Beach be the busiest port in the world. That contributes to climate change. You don't do anything about that, then cars, who cares about cars, you know? So it's kind of like deal with that first. And that really allows people to see kind of the situation we're in here, where okay, so if you wanted to stop global shipping, that means inflation goes through the roof. You're making everything more expensive and things have to be made domestically again. You're basically just destroying the economy, right? And that causes a lot of pain. So, the Democrat solution, I'm sure, is to just provide everybody with a safety net while we undergo these radical changes. But that requires, like I said, a pretty authoritarian government. For 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 me, I feel like there's no real way to get a global consensus, so anything America does is not going to affect the end result. It's like maybe we'll make it happen in maybe because the United States stopped, the worst will happen in 2080 instead of 2100 or 20 maybe even 100 years, 200 years, but it doesn't matter because all of it is after we're dead. So because the effects of climate change for our lives is pretty much we are seeing the effects of climate change in our lives. But it's um if you stop if we stopped today and stopped making carbon emissions, we would still keep seeing these effects anyways for our lives, from what I understand, because it's like a cascade that's already set into motion. So things are already melting and old gas is already being released. So even if we stopped now, things would keep getting worse for a while. So when we're talking about fixing the issue, we're talking about improving it way down the line. We're already in deep water in the short term. So, that means, in my opinion, because anything you do isn't going to be able to solve the issue and it's only going to like delay or alleviate, you have to weigh that against, is there like a crazy real harm here going on in the present? Like, for example, if we just close the port of Long Beach, like I'll make an extreme example, right? Just closing the port of Long Beach to reduce climate change. So let's say by closing that port, now there's so much less shipping containers coming from China that you reduce climate change by, let's say, 10%. But in turn, you destroy the economy of millions of people, maybe even more than that. So you can see how in that case, I don't know any climate activists who propose doing something that extreme, just ending international shipping, right? Because everybody agrees that there's a limit where you have to weigh the short-term harm against the long-term effects. And with a lot of climate policies, the short-term harm is really bad and the long-term effects are mediocre at best. And because Republicans just say that the science is all fake, the debate doesn't really ever happen. Like the actual debate about, okay, yeah, climate change is real, so what should we do about it and how should we deal with it? For me, I think that the first thing that you should do, personally, for me, the very first thing you should do if you want to fix climate change, at least for your country, is to get really rich and have a really rich country. That's what you want. Bottom line. Because it's like if your country's rich enough, you can deal with it. You can deal with the drought. You can deal with the lack of food. You can deal with it. because you'll have money, a lot of money. You can build new levees and dams and create more infrastructure and build nuclear power plants. Like, to me, it's like if we make ourselves poor by closing the port of Long Beach, for example, or by refusing to, or by denying ourselves like cheap sources of energy, you can end up hobbling yourself in regards to reacting. And like I said, we're already in a situation where we have to start reacting. So how do you react? Well, okay, we need to build nuclear power plants. That's a lot of money and requires a lot of expertise and all that. So you want to make your country really rich and then spend those resources wisely instead of using restrictions that hurt everybody, like gas taxes and tariffs. So, like, a gas tax and a tariff, I would rank far below, for example, investing in nuclear energy, because one of them is like penalizing, punitive, and the other one is more just being smart and investing. So those are the kind of solutions that you want to look for. So I think that the climate change argument, like, in my opinion, I feel like I kind of fall in the middle, because I don't support things like gas taxes and emissions taxes unless literally the whole world is on board. But at the same time, I don't think that science is fake. I mean, it's not. So and I do think that we should do as much as we reasonably can, but you can't do things that we unreasonably can't do. So anyways, that's the climate change argument, how I conceive of it anyway. And yeah, thanks.